we believe at the foundation, I believe personally, that the power of business to transform the world is immense. And we have to have government, and we have to have philanthropy and nonprofits, but we also have to have business playing ball. We're going to solve problems.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Travel Trends. This is your host, Dan Christian, and I'm thrilled to bring you part 2 of our 3-part series on sustainability. Last week, we kicked things off speaking to Shannon Geehan, the Chief Sustainability Officer for the Travel Corporation, a longtime colleague and great friend of mine who actually inspired today's interview with Jonathan Coleman from UnTours. As you would have heard, she highlighted the work that the UnTours organization has done over the years and called out Jonathan specifically as a great example of leadership in this space. And given the fact that I had met Jonathan at the Adventure Travel World Summit in Panama last year and recorded a special highlight discussion in our event spotlight episode, I was profoundly interested to learn the backstory of UnTours, and based on Shannon's recommendation, I was really keen to bring him back to specifically talk today about the UnTours Foundation. And I think you'll quickly see how well it fits into this 3-part series, because next week we have Dr. Susan Eddy joining us, who is the Global Environmental Impact Manager over at Intrepid. And I just wanted to highlight that this series has been kindly sponsored by our friends over at Intrepid. And they have also stepped up to sponsor season 7 and season 8 of our podcast going into 2026. So thank you again to the team over at Intrepid for being such big supporters of the Travel Trends podcast and making sure that we can bring conversations like this to life so that our global listeners can learn more about the most important topics in travel, like sustainability, which I know is so core to their DNA and to their brand. So thank you again. And now today, this is where it also gets interesting. We're featuring other companies that are active in this space. And I just wanted to comment on that as well, because it's very important to support the entire industry and every travel company that is active today marketing to travelers and to get them traveling in the right way, which you'll hear is exactly what has been built into UnTours from the very beginning, and all the incredible initiatives that have been underway at the UnTours Foundation for over 20 years. It is a remarkable story. And so I want Jonathan to join us in a moment here to tell everyone about their organization and what they've been up to and what their plans are for 2026. But I just want to remind all of our listeners, we do post clips and highlights on our social channels, so you can find those on LinkedIn, Instagram, and YouTube at Travel Trends Podcast. And for those of you who are listening to this live or the first week this comes out, I also just wanted to acknowledge that this is Christmas Eve, and I wanted to wish everyone a very happy holidays, a Merry Christmas, and however you're celebrating, I hope that you enjoy some downtime with your family and your loved ones and come back feeling fresh for 2026. I know our team is looking forward to the break, and I also know we have a huge year ahead in 2026. So I look forward to continuing many of these conversations and just wanted to acknowledge all of our listeners for your support throughout 2025. Now, let's bring in Jonathan Coleman, the co-CEO of the UnTours Foundation, to tell us all about their work in sustainability. Jonathan, great to have you back on Travel Trends. Thanks so much for joining us.
Really happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
For sure. It's terrific to have you back. Obviously, you were on, as people heard the introduction there, you joined us on a special event spotlight episode at ATTA or ATWS in Panama last year. So we had a chance to meet there. And our listeners would have also heard that Shannon Geehan, our first guest on this sustainability series, mentioned you. And I said, I know Jonathan, and she was adamant you were such a great guest to have on this topic, and I totally agreed. So this is the magic of the connections we both have in the industry, and it reminded me of our conversation. So I'm delighted you are available to join us for the sustainability series. So first of all, thank you for making the time, but also I really want our listeners that are coming to know you for the first time to understand a bit more about UnTours before we get into the UnTours Foundation, because obviously they're interlinked. But yeah, first of all, Jonathan, tell us a little bit about your role and give us a brief overview of UnTours.
Sure. So, well, first of all, very nice of Shannon to speak kindly of me. I hope that I will live up to the expectations that you and Shannon have. But happy to be here and share what I have and a bit of our background and our unique model at UnTours and the UnTours Foundation. So the background on UnTours links uniquely and interestingly to the foundation, but UnTours, the travel company, came first. It was started 50 years ago, actually, this year. So we're in our 50-year anniversary. by a man named Hal Taussig, who was a really amazing human who viewed business and viewed travel differently than people of his era, certainly, and even kind of into this era. It was just well ahead of his time in how he thought business should interact with society and how tourism and travel could interact with society and make it better. So he set up UnTours with the concepts of sustainability and slower travel back in the 70s, again, like before this was a thing that people were really talking about in the industry. And also set up UnTours basically with a model of using uh, homes and apartments as lodging, again, in the 70s and 80s. So before the Airbnb guys were born, UnTours was sending Americans to Europe, staying in apartments primarily throughout the continent. So um, it's just, again, well ahead of his time in how he thought about a lot of things. So he built this company, which was basically helping people travel in a slower way, more culturally immersive way, and with these kind of unique travel packages, which are fully supported independent travel, is the way we like to state it. So a little bit for industry folks, a little bit between FIT and kind of set itineraries. It's some kind of merger of the two, where the big pieces are taken care of, and there's a lot of space for independence and independent decision making on the day-to-day basis. And that model holds firm from the 70s and 80s up to today. But as the company started to gain some footing and started to make some money, around that same time, Hal also, in his own personal journey, took a vow of poverty, committed to having no money, and uh, he lived that fully. He donated his car to a hitchhiker one day, and he never drove again. He rode his bike, around town to in every situation. He and he committed to not taking any of the profits of UnTours travel, and that was back in the early 90s. And so he set up the foundation to take on the profits of the company. So that's how the two have interacted since that time, until more recently when Hal died. He was in his mid 90s when he passed away. This was about 8 years ago now. And when he died, he basically transferred ownership of the travel company to the foundation. And so now we have a very unique model where we have a nonprofit foundation that fully owns the for-profit B Corp travel company. I should name one other important piece of information in the journey is that Hal and UnTours, because it was unique in what they were doing with the profits, but also how they were operating, caught the eye of the folks who founded the B Corp movement as they were framing out what a certified B Corporation would be and what the whole B Corp world would be. And Hal became one of their mentors to the founders of B Corps. And UnTours was one of the examples they were looking towards as they created the framework for what would become B Corps. And actually, UnTours went on to become the world's first ever certified B Corp. So that's our claim to fame, is that we're the first company in the world of all industries to go through that certification process and become certified. So that happened back in 2007, I believe. So that community is obviously an important part of our world as well as a company.
The reason I wanted to give our audience that background, because there's a number of things that you mentioned there. I just wanted to underline a couple of them. I certainly didn't have an appreciation of UnTours being the first B Corp. That was really, truly fascinating. I didn't understand when we first met, and I'm sure that's why it's interesting for all of our listeners, that UnTours, how long the company's been around and how much that was part of the core ethos of the business and the founder from the very beginning. Of course, I worked at G Adventures, as most of our listeners know. Intrepid is a sponsor of this series. They're very committed as well to sustainability for many of the right reasons. And we actually have one of their experts joining us on our next episode. And I was actually delighted that Intrepid was also keen for you to join, because technically UnTours and Intrepid are competitors in the marketplace. But the spirit of sustainability and this approach is that everyone wants the best outcome for our planet, and also to invite more people into this category. So even though you may be not direct competitors, but likely is some overlap, but I just think it's interesting, even Intrepid sponsoring this series, I was very keen to have Shannon. She, of course, works with the Travel Corporation. You work with UnTours. So I just wanted to give that context, because people who are in industry can have the biggest impact in the decisions they're making about how their companies are run. And the one thing that stood out to me about your background, another reason I really wanted to have you as part of this, once Shannon mentioned it, I was like, of course, because you started at the UnTours Foundation before you took over as CEO at UnTours, and you serve in both capacities. So I want to spend our time today speaking about the UnTours Foundation, but there's obviously no way to be able to start having that conversation without explaining UnTours. So add a few more details, because again, it's a fascinating story about the founder and UnTours and how the foundation was created.
Sure. Yeah, so I think you mentioned Intrepid, you mentioned G Adventures or TTC, and I think maybe the main difference would be that UnTours as a company never scaled. So it was a successful small business. It is still a small business. We're not huge. I would say our kind of historical relevance outweighs the actual size of the company, and that's okay. And we're looking and have very clear goals to continue to grow the company and reach some level of larger scale in both size and impact. But we're like, when we talk about the Intrepids or the G's of the world, we are in a different universe as far as size. But as far as values, very much aligned. So just kind of to make that point, and just a few other, I think, touch points that I think are interesting to mention. Another story about how he, back in the early 2000s, won an award given by JFK Jr., back when he was still with us on this earth, and Paul Newman, for the most generous businessman in America. Or the most generous business in America, I guess is what it was, competing against some major corporations, like large corporations were there. And so the story of this event is they were having the award ceremony in the Waldorf Astoria. I think it was that hotel, 5-star hotel, very fancy room, where they're having this dinner, this award ceremony. And Hal was notorious for never staying at the hotels of events that he went to, because he didn't think that he wanted to spend that kind of money. So he would always stay at a hostel and then rent a bike and ride his bike to the event. So this is what he did when he was there at an event with corporate luminaries of the day and some of the most famous people in the world who were there giving him an award, or he was a finalist for the award. And so he's sitting at a table with JFK Jr., who learned that he wasn't staying at the hotel, at the 5-star hotel where the event was being held. And JFK Jr. said to him, "I'm so sorry. My people should have sorted this out for you. Please, we'll get you a room here tonight. No worries at all." And Hal told him, "Nope, that's totally okay. When every person in New York City has a warm place to sleep, then I'll come stay with you here at this hotel. Until then, I'm happy at the hostel down the street." So, I mean, how many of us would have turned down that offer, to stay at the nicest hotel in town, but instead go sleep, at a hostel? And that's just more of the ethos of how viewed life, which was, and his role within it, which is just different and special, different than a lot of people. And so we do our best to maintain that ethos into how we operate both the foundation and the company today. So yeah, that's just another interesting point of the journey and of the story of Hal and why he was so inspiring to a lot of people.
That's a really cool story. And I guess that's where, certainly most people wouldn't, but, like it's a Mother Teresa type character and personality, and someone who's also very much ahead of their time if we look at the way travelers are responding. And this, again, why we want to focus on sustainability. We did one episode in our second season. It was one of the most popular episodes ever. And I always have a conversation with each of our guests about sustainability. It's important to me. It should be important to everyone. But it's a topic that, as I discussed with Shannon, there's so many different terms that get thrown around with sustainability. But, someone like him being a visionary and ahead of his time, much more like an Yves Chouinard who runs Patagonia, this idea that you're going to reinvest all the profits, but then actually, give the company ultimately back to, and all the money that's generated goes back to, protecting land and national parks, creating national parks. And, it's extraordinary to see how people with money, like the impact they can have. So let's get into that. So now that, people know what UnTours is and how long you guys have been around and what you guys do, the UnTours Foundation. So walk us through, especially given you've been there running that now for 5 years, when it started, what its overall mission is. And then obviously I want to get into some of the projects you work on. You've got some really amazing partners. So you highlight yes, although you're a smaller business, you punch above your weight in impact, which is why we wanted to have you as part of this discussion, because I think many of the things that you're doing are certainly leading by example and others are following suit. So yeah, give everyone now more of a detailed overview of the UnTours Foundation. because you guys do more than just tourism as well. So
Yeah, of course. I'm very happy to go into that. And so, yeah, the UnTours Foundation, founded by Hal back in 1993, uh, and with the mission of to unleash capital and radical kindness to nurture ideas and build healthy, sustainable communities. So that's like, mission statement jargon. But basically, what that means is we weren't set up as a traditional foundation to be a grant making institution. Most foundations are set up where there's an endowment. So there's this pool of money that is put over an endowment, and that endowment lives in traditional investments, stocks, bonds, private equity, whatever. And by law in the U.S., laws are slightly different everywhere, but they look pretty similar across the Western world. But in the U.S., the law is 5% of the foundation's assets need to be allocated to its mission each year. That's what foundations use to pay their staff and make grants, typically to nonprofits who are doing work that's aligned with their mission. So Hal kind of saw that model and thought it was crazy. Wait, I'm going to put all this money into the foundation, but I'm only going to use 95% of it to actually achieve the mission that I want to see happen. And the other 95% is just earning money, which helps me later achieve the mission, but in and of itself is not actually doing anything to accomplish the mission. And depending on which companies it's invested in, it's quite likely having a direct opposite impact of what the mission of the foundation is, which is to drive sustainability, which is to drive community impact, to drive livelihoods through business. And so, for example, foundations across the world have this, the paradigm with which foundations have worked over the last 100 years is that the people who are making the decisions on how they have impact are not the same ones who are making decisions on how their endowment is used. And the people who are managing their endowment are only trying to make money, and the people who are managing their impact are trying to have an impact. But those making the money might be doing so in a way that is contradictory to the mission of the foundation. So, as an example, you may have an environmental focus of your foundation, and you may be earning the money that's granting to environmental organizations through owning fossil fuel companies. Or you may have a mission on racial justice here in the U.S., but you may actually own a piece of private prisons, which are a perpetuator of racial injustice in the country. And so there's this disconnect, which totally didn't make sense to Hal. And so he set up the foundation in a really unique way, and in a way that is, again, well ahead of its time, to have 100% of that endowment directly invested into businesses that advance the mission of the foundation. And that became the mission of the foundation. So instead of having an endowment here and grant making here, those are merged together. And basically, the money that came into the foundation from UnTours and eventually from other funding partners and donors are basically become a revolving impact investment fund, or in foundation speak, they would say mission aligned investing fund. And basically, that means all of the money that's there is being invested, typically through low interest loans, into social enterprises and impact focused businesses that are aiming to do more, to be better for their local communities, to be better for the environment, or just to scale up. And they need the capital to grow. And so the foundation provides that capital, again, typically in the form of a low interest loan. We've been doing that for 30 years. Very unique. As far as we know, we're the first foundation in the US to have 100% of our assets aligned with our mission, which is pretty cool. The most advanced, there are some foundations now that do this. The biggest foundations out there that you may know of, maybe they allocate 5% of their endowments to their mission, or 10% of their endowment to their mission. The rest of it is just in traditional stocks and bonds, even today, totally disconnected from the mission of the foundation. So, we are proud that we were an early forebearer to this movement of more closely aligning the assets of foundations to their missions. And I'll make one final point on that. There's over $1 trillion in foundation assets and foundation endowments in the US alone. So this is real money that is totally on the sidelines for impact, and is there. It's making money, but it's not making money in a way that it is necessarily aligned with the mission, and it's not helping to achieve the mission of these foundations. So we see part of our role as being a forebearer to that movement in the realization that within the foundation space is to be an example for other foundations to follow, to allocate more of those assets that we have to the missions that we have, so that we see more good stuff happen more quickly.
Yeah. And that's the part. So just to recap too for our audience, and this is where, as I was wrapping my head around the UnTours business, the UnTours Foundation, and then looking at the impact you have on other organizations, that ultimately is kind of the three key pillars. You've highlighted them there, that you own and operate UnTours Travel, which is the world's first certified B Corp. And it's very much focused on community-based travel, primarily in Europe, which is, when we look at We Road and look at some of the companies today, as you talk about some companies that are scaling rapidly in this space or have scaled substantially in this space. So there's a core real business there. But then you take 100%, not 95. So, and obviously as people are having this conversation, I mentioned it at the beginning in the introduction, but untoursfoundation.org, if you want to kind of follow along as we're having this conversation, because I want to take this opportunity today, Jonathan, with a conversation with you to inspire more travel companies globally to consider their commitment to the planet, to the environment, to the communities they serve. I know it's top of mind for most organizations, but at the same time, you're trying to run a business, generate a profit, and also pay salaries for your team. And so there's many competing priorities, which is why the concept of people, planet, profit. So you have to run, in most instances, a profitable business to be able to even engage in being able to donate. But yeah, those are the three key pillars. And one other thing I just wanted to highlight too for our listeners that I found fascinating, because I was reading your 2024 impact report, and this relates to the numbers you were sharing, because when we think about this foundation being created in 1992, my understanding is that you guys have invested more than $10 million during that time across more than 400 businesses worldwide. And in 2024 specifically, you invested $600,000 across 23 different businesses. And so, as you say, I mean, $10 million is still a very meaningful amount of money, even over that time. The fact that you guys are putting $600,000, and the fact that it's, 100%, you guys are very focused on being lean and committing your entire endowment to having impact investing, which is something I want to dive a bit more into. But just to finish on that last point you were sharing with everybody, is that a lot of organizations who are much larger and even far more profitable are looking to you and UnTours Foundation for guidance on how they can do good in the world. So take us a little bit through that part right now, because when people are looking at your website, they can see the number of partners you work with. So I think that's where even your impact there is much greater than just the amount you're investing each year.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for pointing that out. And I think there's a few key points of leverage that we have that we're trying to use to have an outsized impact beyond what our kind of size is. One is back to this whole idea of how foundations work. So because we have an interesting model that others can look to, and we've actually dedicated a lot of our energy to helping other foundations go on that journey, we've helped to move over $500 million of foundation endowments into impact. So we have a few $1 million of assets ourselves, but we've helped to move over 5 million, something we're really proud of. All of this totally disconnected from the tourism space. But within tourism, we recognized a few years ago a few key points that one, we run a travel company, but our foundation efforts haven't been connected to tourism historically. We thought that maybe we could remedy that. We know a thing or two. Maybe we should use that knowledge to actually align with some of our foundation work. Two, small businesses, which are our core focus area, represent 80% of the businesses in the tourism industry. And meaning they're an incredibly powerful lever of impact within the industry. And to a certain extent, where small businesses go, the industry goes. And we as an industry need small businesses who are at the front lines of fighting climate change and ensuring that the industry is a positive asset to a local community, to a host destination. Those small businesses are at those front lines, and they don't receive the resources they need to be better, both to be better for their local communities, better for the environment, and also just better as businesses. Businesses need capital to invest into projects and infrastructure that are needed to be better. And that capital just doesn't exist for small businesses, specifically in tourism. So we wanted to solve that problem and fill that gap. But we acknowledged we don't have enough money to fill the gap. We're too small. And so from the beginning, we wanted to solve that problem, but we needed to set up a tool to solve the problem that could be bigger than just us. And it could connect more broadly in the industry. So we set up about 3 years ago now the Reset Tourism Fund, again with this explicit purpose to provide flexible and affordable capital to small and growing businesses in the tourism industry to help them scale up their impact and sustainability efforts and to just scale their business overall, and to be kind of the primary source of this type of flexible and affordable capital within this space. And we set it up so that other much larger corporate partners can join the efforts. And so you mentioned some of the partners that you saw on the website. We launched, the first two partners were the TUI Care Foundation, the foundation of TUI, and Expedia Group. So obviously two massive companies who have huge scale, but that scale allows them to have a philanthropic arm and be able to do some philanthropy. And so we were able to basically turn that philanthropy, that corporate philanthropy from the industry, and turn it into this revolving impact loan fund. And so that allows our partners, our corporate partners, to have direct impact to small businesses on the ground who are doing the work, but have this kind of intermediary in the middle who's translating that philanthropy that comes into loans. We know how to run a loan program. We know how to do the due diligence and do the underwriting and all of this stuff, get repaid, make sure that the money comes back. All of that is our kind of core competency. And but we're able to be that conduit to the stuff that's happening on the ground with this fund. And the goal is that we're able to scale it up kind of to a much larger level to drive more and more resources, again, on the ground, at the ground level, and not focusing only on the NGOs or nonprofits who are doing the important work. They need the money, certainly, but also on the SMEs or the small businesses who have to be a part of the equation if we're going to solve real problems. So that's the goal of the Reset Tourism Fund, and we've been able to expand our partnership base beyond Expedia and TUI to a number of others in the industry.
Well, I noticed that as well. So one of the things, obviously, just to highlight there, because this is what stood out to me, is that fund's more than doubled in the past year, and it's because of these new partners like Skyscanner, Tourism Cares, Agoda, XO. So it's really interesting to see the companies that are partnering with you and the collaborations. We'll be right back.
Travel has changed, but many multi-day tour operators are still stuck with spreadsheets and disconnected systems. Today's travelers expect more: choice, flexibility, unforgettable experiences without the friction. That's where Captio comes in. Built on Salesforce, Captio is the modern platform designed specifically for multi-day tour operators. From tailor-made trips to group tours, rail to river, we bring your itineraries, bookings, payments, and operations together in one seamless system. With automation, real-time inventory, and supplier integrations, we make complex travel simple so you can do what you do best: serve travelers, not spreadsheets. Check out Captio.com for more details. PayCompass is the leading merchant processor built specifically for the travel industry. PayCompass makes it easy for travel businesses to get approved with high processing limits, so operators and agencies can scale without barriers. They deliver some of the highest authorization rates in the industry, backed by powerful chargeback mitigation services that protect revenue and reputation. Plus, with tools like virtual cards, PayCompass helps travel brands manage payments smarter and more efficiently. Simply put, PayCompass isn't just a processor. They're helping travel businesses grow stronger and faster.
Dan Christian here from Travel Trends. If you're a travel advisor looking for the next big thing in group travel, then you need to know about WeRoad. WeRoad is a community-driven, small group travel brand that is designed for today's connection-seeking traveler. Their secret? About 90% of WeRoaders start solo and end up with a whole new crew of friends. These trips run in tight-knit groups and are led by one of over 4,000 trained travel coordinators, whose entire mission it is to spark connection from day one. WeRoad is built for travelers in their 20s, 30s, and 40s who want same age, same language groups. And with over 300,000 travelers already on board, the demand is real. And for trade, this is where it gets exciting. WeRoad's new trade program gives advisors competitive land commissions, flexible holds, toolkits, training, dedicated support, and co-marketing opportunities. Plus, flights aren't included, meaning you control the air, ancillaries, and pre-post stays. So it's time to partner with WeRoad. Give your clients the group trip they'll actually brag about. Head to weroad.com/welcome-travel-advisors to get started. That's weroad.com/welcome-travel-advisors. And now, back to the show. two things I want to talk about along this line. And obviously, we'll jump around in this conversation because I'm always mindful of what's going to be most interest to our listeners and our audience as we have this conversation. One of the things I just wanted to highlight right there, because some of our listeners may be thinking initially, especially given we got such a wonderful global audience of people in the travel industry, but various different roles. And I like to think, I guess, from the ground up. So if some of those organizations, so let's talk first, because there's going to be more people listening to this that could benefit from being a beneficiary of one of the funds. And then I want to go back to the larger corporates, because there definitely are definitely are individuals from those companies listening as well. But obviously those are fewer and far between. And I don't want to just stay on the kind of the corporate track. But so if we think about organizations that have the benefit of being, of receiving a loan from UnTours Foundation, tell us a little bit how that works. So when you guys are actually deploying the funds, how you guys are making decisions about where you're going to invest, the types of people. And I just want to call it one great example of this, because we clearly have a lot of great colleagues in common. Daniel Quintana is one good example that works with you guys. But there's a lady named Leslie Robb, who you guys featured on your blog. And Leslie, I worked with at G Adventure. She's an incredibly talented designer, and she runs a small business called Swell Impact. And she works, and you guys had highlighted and featured her, and I know how delighted she was. And I'd seen that blog post, and we're still great friends. She lives out in Halifax. She's got a young family, and she's still very active in this space. And I was just delighted that you found her, recognized her, and it just highlights to me that you guys are on the mark with the types of people that you're backing and profiling. So other people out there like Leslie, that are doing really interesting things, how do you connect with them, find them? How do they find you and get backed by you guys?
Yeah. So interesting that you mentioned Leslie. Maybe a slightly different relationship with her. Leslie actually works with us. So she manages some of our marketing and our design. And so we feel the exact same way that you do about her, though I should acknowledge that she wasn't a recipient of the Reset Tourism Fund. She's, works for us as a contractor. But I can name several other examples. But to answer your question, as far as how does one get involved? How does a business that needs some funding, has big ambition to improve or to scale up, and needs some money to do so, how do they get involved? First off, from our perspective, we're receiving funding from different corporate partners who have different goals. Maybe it's geographic areas they want to focus on. Maybe it's impact areas they want to focus on. And so we have to align our decisions based on those preferences of the funding partners. So, which means that sometimes we have an applicant to the Reset Tourism Fund that is absolutely amazing, but they just don't align with one of the funding buckets that we're managing at the time. But it's maybe just to give an example, Expedia Group has been our largest funder to date over multiple years. And they have had a focus on inclusive travel. So they want to support companies that are serving underserved travelers. And so our job has been to go out and source those companies, to find them, and to find those that are ready to scale up and to do more and to take on capital, and then we can provide the capital. And so that's been not geographic focused at all, but very much on this impact focus of companies that serve travelers with disabilities, companies that serve solo female travelers or travelers of color, LGBTQ plus travelers. Those companies we are finding, or some of them are finding us. They're completing an application. We move into like a due diligence process with them, and many of those we've gone on to fund with the support of Expedia. So the decision making process essentially looks like that. We have these priorities from our partners. We put the word out into the world. Hey, there's this funding is available in this place, or these places, or along these funding lines, these impact areas, and we see who's interested. And in the process from the small business side is to complete an application, which is on our website. And for those that we think are a good fit, we move to an introductory screening, which is basically a half hour. You mentioned Daniel Quintana. It's usually with Daniel, who's having the introductory call. And then for those that continue to feel like they're a good fit, we move them into full due diligence, where we are doing the same type of work that any investor or any lender would do, but we're overlaying that with a lens towards impact. A very intentional and extreme lens towards impact. So that is, we don't and won't make loans or investments to companies that aren't, values aligned. But they also have to be good businesses, and they have to be able to pay us back, or our model doesn't work. So we're providing very flexible capital. The terms are quite flexible. The interest rates are very low. We're talking like a 5% average interest rate for an unsecured business loan anywhere in the world. That's really good, and especially in kind of the developing world, that's unheard of. So we are very, very friendly investors, both from a financial perspective and from how we operate. Um, Part of our mission, I mentioned, is unleashing capital with radical kindness, and so that's how we do business. But we also need to ensure that these are solid businesses with a solid business model that ensures that we can get paid back, so that we can recycle that money and put it to work again to the next small business who wants to do amazing things. So yeah, that due diligence process looks very much like a bank would do, or a traditional investor, but is just with a different lens, and with a different like risk return profile, is how we would say in the investing world.
For sure. And obviously, as people look at on the untoursfoundation.org, the apply for investment, there's obviously, as you highlighted, the Reset Tourism Fund, there's the Shifting the Paradigm Fund, and people can get the information they need there in terms of, the types of categories you invest in, whether it's hotels or tours, restaurants, museums, and aligning, of course, with your guiding principles. And certainly that's going to be an important consideration for a lot of our listeners. So definitely check that out afterwards. There's so many great people that either you're connected to, and so there obviously people are drawn to UnTours Foundation as well, which is clearly why Leslie's keen to work with you guys. But nevertheless, let's talk about the business side. So the other element that is also interesting for me, but given my background of both G Adventures and the Travel Corporation, one of the things that neither of those organizations did, at least from travelers, was actually allow them to donate. And so there's one thing, and there's a totally different side of it, which is how you actually raise those funds. So take us a little bit through the donations, because obviously, yes, you work with corporate partners, but if there's someone that is looking to give a donation, of course, this is airing in season 6, so some people are going to be listening to this just before Christmas, so this is certainly the giving time of the year, and so I thought I'd just highlight that as well for those of you in the spirit or going into the new year feeling generous. Take us a little bit through the donation side of it.
Sure. Right. So we have a few different sources of funding for the foundation. To be totally transparent, right now, UnTours, the company, is not a source of funding for the foundation. After Hal passed, went through a bit of some challenges as a business, as often does in transition, and then COVID hit, and then now we're rebuilding. And so all kind of resources coming through the travel company itself are staying in there to rebuild. But the foundation's efforts are well beyond that, and aren't reliant on that, and have become non-reliant on the travel company. And so the sources of funding that come in, we do have, the travel company has been around for 50 years, so there's a lot of customers of the company over the years who have become funders. And so this is not the bulk of our funding, but an important supplement of funding comes from the travelers themselves, who are, we call them untourists, who travel with our company and then donate usually smaller dollar amounts, $1,500, $200 to the foundation. But amongst those are some larger individual funders who have the capacity to give quite a bit more, and who do. And so that's like on the individual level, connected with the company. We also have and are very open to receiving funding from other individuals who just believe in what we're doing. And so, to be honest, we as a foundation haven't done a great job of appealing to a broader mass audience. We think, a very compelling and important role to play, and important impact that we are achieving. But we could and should do more to let the general audience out there in the world know that this is a possibility. Like, we are doing this good work, and you should come and join us. So I thank you for mentioning it, because we would love those contributions, and it just helps us enhance our work. But of course, the other key part of our growth in the last couple of years has been aligning with corporations, specifically within the travel industry. So that's allowing us to put money into the fund, which then goes out as loans and recycles in that way. And we carve out some of that to help pay our bills, to pay our staff to go do the work. So I guess the other maybe source of funding is really the interest rate that we charge on our loans. But the interest rate at 5% is really pegged to kind of cover our losses. We're not trying to make money on that. We know that some of these loans won't come back, and so we estimate it over time that will be about 5%. So that's where we put the interest rate. But otherwise, we're paying our day-to-day costs through other donations or as a percentage of the large corporate donations.
That's helpful context. So the other thing is in terms of talking about donations, talking about some of the organizations and how they could engage with you. But let's talk about the projects that you are making a difference in, because obviously that's ultimately the measure of success, as we both know. So talk us through a few of the projects that you guys have funded, that you've been involved in over the years, and the impact that they've had on their communities or on those organizations.
Right. So now we've made over 50 investments out of the Reset Tourism Fund in the last couple of years, of over $1.5 million invested specifically out of the Reset Tourism Fund. And a few examples. So just at the beginning of last year, we invested in an amazing company in Scotland, founded in Edinburgh, but now expanding throughout the UK, called Invisible Cities. And Invisible Cities works with people who have experienced homelessness and trains them to be tour guides in their own cities, and then hires them as guides and does the marketing to sell their tours to individuals and corporations and DMCs and all of that. So they are really interesting because they're solving a very important community problem and using tourism as the tool to solve the problem. So we have homelessness crisis, homelessness challenges in communities around the world, and it's kind of offering a job is oftentimes not enough. There's a lot of training, there's a lot of social work and other components of needs that these individuals have to allow them to succeed in a work environment. And so Invisible Cities is able to provide that themselves and working with partners, but also link it in with the industry overall, so that there's business there. There are clients coming and they're therefore paying the bills. So Invisible Cities is an amazing example of how tourism can solve real problems in a local community if it's done in an intentional way.
I was just going to say, one of the other ones that stood out to me from 2025, and this is Iris, who runs women's work. Mm-hmm. And I have a great respect for her and what she's doing. And I've seen her at a number of conferences this year. And certainly, you guys also contributed to them. They were at 2025. So tell us about them, for example, and why you selected women's work and what impact you've had in that regard.
Yeah, happy to talk about that as well. Maybe that's a slightly different context than our typical investment, because typically we're investing in companies that are actual travel companies on the ground doing work. But sometimes we invest in the next level up. And so women's work is empowering travel companies through trainings and accelerators and incubators and these kind of things. And so we love the work that Iris is doing through women's work. We see the power in it and the importance of it. And so we're very happy to come alongside and help to fund some of that. So yeah, that's just an interesting other type of business that we wanted to get involved in, because it's more an ecosystem level play as opposed to an individual business in an individual place. But a very cool example of how tourism has the power to achieve real change.
We'll be right back.
Planning your next trip abroad? Stay connected the smart way with Olafly, the global leader in eSIMs for travelers. With coverage in over 200 destinations and a 4.6 out of 5 Trustpilot rating, Olafly is the go-to for international travel. Forget fumbling with SIM cards. Olafly's eSIM activates instantly with a QR code. You'll be online in just 2 minutes with unlimited data and no surprise roaming charges. Whether it's a short getaway, frequent business travel, or life as a digital nomad, Olafly has a plan for you. Get started today at esim.olafly.com. That's esim.olafly.com. In a world of endless travel options, how do you guarantee quality? The answer is curation, and it's the core of Civitatis, the leading marketplace for global tours and activities. Instead of just more options, their promise is more quality. Their experts handpick the best from over 90,000 activities in 4,000 destinations worldwide, ensuring every tour meets the highest standards of quality, availability, and price. They focus this winning strategy on capturing the world's fastest growing customer market, travelers from Latin America. By connecting these travelers to their global portfolio of experiences in native Spanish or Portuguese, Civitatis creates the powerful customer loyalty your business can count on. Their model is a proven formula for generating massive demand and driving industry-leading conversion. For the travel trade, the message is clear. Partnering with Civitatis is your strategy for capturing the massive outbound Latin American market and turning their growth into your revenue. Visit Civitatis.com for more details. Today, 65% of travel queries trigger an AI overview. If your brand isn't showing up there, you're losing bookings. It's that simple. This is the new reality that Propellic, the AI-first digital marketing agency for travel, helps brands master. Their entire focus is on delivering what matters, performance bookings, not just clicks. They've done the research on how AI is changing everything from search to purchase. You can find their groundbreaking new report right on their website. While you're there, join over 1,000 travel marketers by subscribing to their newsletter, The Navlog. Stay ahead of the curve. Visit Propellic.com.
And now, back to the show. One more I have to call out, only because you guys were very early on this one too, is Greether. You guys got involved with them in 2023, and Vanessa's had such an amazing year this year, and that's like, and I've actually mentioned her on stage a couple of times when I was at the Focusrite conference recently. I was doing a panel on how people get welcomed at airports. It was sponsored by a company called Welcome Pickups, and we were just talking about the arrival experience. And I use Greether as a great example of an organization that is, focused on having your bestie in destination, and for solo female travelers, which so that's another one that you guys were, on too early, I guess, in the grand scheme of things. But and similar to women's work, with the idea of solo female and empowering female leaders and also female travelers.
Yeah, women's work also love that business. I mean, I love all of these businesses, but you picked some good ones. So Greether, right, exists to basically for female travelers, kind of targeted solo female travelers, to have someone, a friendly face, another female, to welcome you in a new place and act as a best friend for a little while, and to show you around and help have a unique experience, kind of behind the scenes experience, real, true local experience in a place as a female traveler, which is harder to do as female travelers. So yeah, they actually came through an accelerator with Expedia a few years ago. I'll focus on inclusive travel, and then the funding that flowed through to Greether, actually the source of that funding was the Expedia Group as well. So that's kind of the funder connection there. But yeah, we were able to be an early investor into Greether, and I'm proud to say that I was the first male to be greeted, to actually use to be allowed to use the business and to use the resource. So I had a half a day in Istanbul this past spring, and I wrote Vanessa and said, "Hey, I'm going to be there. I'd love to try the product, try it out and see how it is." And she said, "We can make an exception for you." So, yeah, when it was amazing, just as an experience, just as a traveler, it's such a incredible way to experience a place. And even more so, regardless of gender or background or anything like that, it's just a good product. But then knowing that the value is there to make it easier for female travelers to travel without that the reality of the fear that can come from the reality of traveling while female, and so both the impact is amazing and the product itself is amazing, and that is the best scenario that we're looking for.
Yeah. And the other one I want to call, I've just got one more, but I know there's, but the one other one that stood out to me that I found really fascinating was out in Colombia. And it's BIPOC owned, but it's also one of the reason it stood out to me is because it's one of the things that we overlook, or often overlook in the industry, is when we're looking at, and specifically LGBTQ plus travelers. And I've had my good friend Danny Guerrero on this podcast talking about this. He's based in LA. He's a big advocate for both diversity and inclusion, and he's Latino and he's a gay man, and he's taught me so much about how to be able to market to the gay community specifically. Like that, it's one, male couples are typically affluent. When you look at like river cruises, and it's like, it's one of the things when you put a brochure together and you put images together, it's difficult to try and speak to everyone and try to make sure that everyone feels welcome, even if it's not intentional that you're trying to exclude someone. But he really helped me understand the messaging, the imagery, and again, that's as important as a travel marketer, because it was not something you were intentionally excluding, but you actually need to be intentional about including and incorporating and being conscientious of that. So this is one of the ones that stood out to me. I know TreadRight Foundation is involved in them as well, which obviously connects to the conversation I had last week with Shannon, interestingly enough. And I don't know anything about them other than what I've learned from reading your website and preparing for our conversation. But I'm a big advocate for travel to Colombia, but there's certain destinations where gay travelers don't feel safe. And that's something, again, that stands out when destinations have to figure out how best to market and to make sure that people feel welcome and included. So tell us a little bit about that, if you wouldn't mind. Just share a little bit more details about that initiative and how you guys have worked together.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same story repeated over different scenarios of both. As a society, we have a lot of work to do. A global society, we have a lot of work to do to being inclusive and accessible and safe for folks of all backgrounds and all perspectives. And that, so I mentioned Greether, we talked about them, and then out in Colombia is a different people group, but same challenge of we as an industry and a society more broadly, we need to be more open and be more accommodating to these needs and to the different realities of different people groups. And also, these are massive business opportunities. So you kind of made that point that the LGBTQ plus community can travel, wants to travel. They want to travel to places that maybe it's not as safe for them, and they need some help. Therefore, it's harder to do it independently. And this is out in Colombia is a good example of a company that makes that easier and safer and more comfortable for gay travelers to experience an amazing place that they should be able to experience without the help, to be honest. But this is the reality of our time. And so there's this the fact that there's a company there to allow them to have this experience, which they deserve to be able to have, is is aligned very much with our values and what we're trying to accomplish. But again, it's a business opportunity there too. And so these are we believe at the foundation, I believe personally, that the power of business to transform the world is immense. And we have to have government, and we have to have philanthropy and nonprofits, but we also have to have business playing ball if we're going to solve problems. And so when you see problems that can be solved in a way that is also that has a business model that makes sense and is profitable and is scalable, these are we just need that 1,000 times more in our industry and others. And so these are just great examples of those.
Well, and to bring it back to the theme of the series, which is obviously sustainability, and all of this ties together. I mean, depending on how what terms you want to use and how you define them. And again, that was an interesting conversation to kick off with Shannon, because whether it's green, eco, sustainable, regenerative, all of these different terms that are utilized that are difficult for people to understand, and myself included. For many travelers, we think about the obvious things about being green and lessening our impact, and in the hotels, the towels that we use, and water running, those kind of things and even the UNWTO that I also briefly asked Shannon about, it's complex to understand all the different ways you can have your impact. And it's almost like you need to find your pin, and you find something that you kind of latch onto, whether it's planting trees or it's there's something carbon offsets is obviously what are you going to do to make the world a better place or to make it more sustainable? And we all have different things we gravitate to given our history, our backgrounds, and what's meaningful. So the women stand out for me because I was raised by a single mom. So I always advocate for women in the workplace. That's something that's been very important to me for a long time. And so when I see Iris, or I see an example like Greether, I'm just so excited for those projects and initiatives, because it's only a generation ago that my mom didn't get to go to university because her brother, who was the boy, he was given the opportunity and she wasn't. And sadly, he passed away and she ended up a single mom, and she could have really benefited from that. And this is kind of like, that's one generation. Like, it's like, these things are not, so as you mentioned, these are the times we live in. There's still lots of inequity. There's lots of challenges. But to tie it back to sustainability and the concept of this series, how best to do that from your point of view? Because I was reading one of your blog posts from earlier this year, I guess it would have been in February, about about the changing world and all of the updates at UnTours. And I found it interesting. I found it inspiring. For me, I was trying to figure out how best to tie our conversation to this idea of, unleash capital and radical kindness to nurture ideas and build healthy, sustainable communities. So take us a little bit through how you and the team view sustainability and all this work that you're doing, how that ties to the overall concept of sustainability.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned there's just way too many words that one needs to understand, or try to get their head around to understand what can be done or is being done around this concept of sustainability or impact. I would say this, as humans and as businesses, there are negative outcomes of our existence, right? We produce trash, in our homes. In the travel industry, we fly most places. If we're doing international travel, we are flying, and the emissions that come from that and the negative impacts that come from that, we have to own that, and I think and find ways to. I don't want to use the word offset because I think that has a very specific connotation, but maybe there's not a better word, but to try to equal out that impact, that we're having, that there's just a reality of negative impacts that come, but as individuals and as businesses, we can and should try to balance those out. What happens in industry, what happens in capitalism, is that we're able to externalize those negative impacts, to pass those on to someone else. And so we can produce, when we're talking environmentally or otherwise, produce negative outputs that come, which is sometimes unavoidable, but we externalize the cost of those impacts on someone else. And so I think it's our role to accept that we have the negative impacts and then work to equal things out, to ensure that our impact is more net positive than negative. Again, as individuals and as institutions or businesses or nonprofits. What we believe in the more broad understanding of sustainability, which is inclusive of environments and climate and all of these things, but it's also inclusive of other things which make our planet sustainable for the people within it. That's about good jobs. That's about equitable access to opportunity. That's about, any number of these more social issues, what they would be defined as social issues. And for us, sustainability is all of those things, because for our world to be sustainable, we need people's lives to be sustainable. We need individual humans and individual homes to have what they need to survive, and to do so in a way that doesn't further damage the actual environment of the earth or people within the earth. So our narrow role within that for the UnTours Foundation is about flexible and affordable capital for smaller businesses. We can't solve all of the problems. So we've chosen to define our role around this one core competency that just is not enough of out there in the world, which is how to deploy capital around the world to small businesses. That's not easy. There's a lot of challenges within that, and it's a pretty narrow remit. Our impact focus, therefore, is quite broad. It can be around environmental sustainability. It can be around social equity. It can be around any number of other issues. But the tool is supporting businesses through impact-focused investment or flexible, affordable capital, and that's our niche, and that's where we want to be. I think every individual and every institution needs to find their role, and it doesn't have to be, okay, well, we produce this many emissions, so we plant this many trees to offset it. That is a way, that is something, and it's an important piece of the puzzle. But it can be more creative than that, I think, and deeper than that. But it has to begin with an acknowledgement of the problem, or the acknowledgement of not even the problem, the reality, which is the negative externalities of of our our existence as a company, and then to move towards finding ways to counteract those with positivity.
It's really interesting to get your take on that side of sustainability, and it just highlights just how complex it is to try and get the messaging right. But ultimately, I think it's one of those things, if your heart's in the right place and you're looking to have a positive impact, it's clear that UnTours, the organization and the foundation, are committed to that, the number of projects you're involved in. And so one of the things I also wanted to get your take on too is where the industry is headed with regards to sustainability. So as you kind of give us an overview of how you guys view sustainability, when we take a wider look at the industry at large in 2026 and beyond, what are some of the emerging trends you're seeing in sustainable travel that will change traveler expectations or industry practices? What are some of the things, given all those projects you're working on and how you guys view sustainability? What would be sort of your, I guess, guidance and advice to those people that are looking to understand this space? But specifically, let's talk about the trends. And then I want to get some practical advice too for you, for travelers and the industry.
Yeah, sustainability has been on an interesting journey over the last number of years within the tourism industry. And I'll say, I'm not a tourism guy. And yeah, I wasn't until I was. I didn't grow up in this industry. I grew up more in the side of the foundation side of our work. We're making the investments and doing the creative capital. So that's been more of my career. So I'm new to tourism, but it's been interesting to see how the industry has grappled with sustainability and what the consumer response is within that. And the reality is consumers are becoming more and more sophisticated, and the bullshit-o-meter of younger consumers that are now growing into being able to purchase travel and to travel is the bullshit-o-meter is real, and they're able to see through the fluff and the greenwashing and the good washing that exists in our industry and others. And so I think there is the industry is doing it and must accelerate the movement towards real impact and not just stories and not just greenwashing or a few good points, but over here 99% of the work is causing problems and 1% is doing a little bit of good. It needs to be a more equal exchange, and people are starting to see that, and the consumers are starting to ask for it, but less than I think we all wish. This is the other balance of what the trends we see around consumers saying it's important, and then the actual purchasing decisions of consumers aren't always aligned with like their own values as well. So I think we as a society, both ends of this, I guess, equation, the tourism companies and the travelers, are part of a larger society where this is a problem, where it takes effort and sometimes takes more money to be more sustainable or to be better. And that is a reality that we all have to grapple with, and we have to find the right balance for ourselves. But I think the trends is in the right direction on both sides, on the consumer and the travel company side, but it has to accelerate faster for all of us, for our world. The other thing that's been interesting is this start movement away from, speaking specifically around environmental sustainability and carbon and climate impacts, movement from direct offsets to something a little softer, and that takes a more broad view of how you can offset or counteract the negative impacts of your carbon emissions or what have you. And so there's several larger companies who are starting to, a few publicly, others internally, that conversations I've been part of, they're starting to rethink, what does their carbon impact fund look like? Is it just direct offsets, planting trees, this kind of thing, or can it be more holistic and take a more broad view? And that's an interesting journey. That's a trend that I'm seeing, and that I'll be interested to see how it comes out, because the reality is it's easier to measure the tree planting. This is our negative outputs are this. We offset it with this. Easy to measure. It's much harder to measure, for example, what we do. It's to measure the direct carbon impacts of, let's say, we help finance solar panels on a eco lodge, which we have done. Some of that's relatively easy because we can get a baseline of what previous years were, and then we can see of the future years what the impact was. But even that takes time. Like, you have to do these longitudinal studies to get it, and it's easier to have the direct impact and have the knowledge up front in some of these old ways. But I think everyone's seeing that while that is important, it's limited, and there's much more ways that impact can happen. And they're starting to play around with that in the industry, which I think is really interesting.
One other question on this before we get into the practical advice, and then I want to make sure everyone knows how to find you guys and engage with you, Jonathan, because obviously I know you're very active in the industry at events and LinkedIn as well. Obviously, we've talked about the website, but I wanted to highlight the fact that I've been referencing the 2024 stats, and we're having this conversation. I don't often timestamp our episodes, but I think it's important in this regard because this is launching right at the end of 2025. So many people will be listening to this in 26. Obviously, you have the report coming out for 2025, and you've got your plans for 2026. So given some of the projects we've talked about, the trends you were just highlighting, give us a little bit of an overview of UnTours Foundation in 2026, and specifically, how you're going to evaluate the success of the initiatives. What are some of the outcomes that you're aiming to achieve this year, especially with the Reset Tourism Fund? We've talked, extensively about some of the things you guys have done. Tell us about some of the things that you're doing and that are coming up in 2026 and beyond.
Yeah, I think thank you for that question. The reality is we've set a really good base for the Reset Tourism Fund in our work. We're a few years in now. We've had some good funding partners, some good success with that funding. Internally, our systems are aligned, and we're just ready to scale it up now. So we're ready to handle more money and to deploy more money. And that's money out into the world, making amazing things happen, coming back in as it's repaid, and then recycling it again. And so that where we're at is not some big, massive transition or massive effort that's going to happen within our internal goals. It's just around accelerating the movement. So, this past year, let's say we added $750,000 to the Reset Tourism Fund through some of our own money and from our partners. And we need to have at least that much again, or double that, or more than that. We can handle that now. We can handle more money. We couldn't 2 years ago. We weren't quite there, but now we are. So it's just a matter of accelerating that growth and the scale of this program, so that these loans that are going out, there's just more of them. And then therefore more SMEs are able to scale their impact, scale their revenue. And, the industry as a whole is better. The supplier, these SMEs, these small businesses are the suppliers of the big businesses. And so therefore the big businesses now have taken efforts to reduce their negative impacts through the positive impact they're having on their suppliers, and ensuring that their suppliers can be better. So that is a very virtuous circle, and it's, from our perspective, we're just at that point where we're ready to scale it up, and we hope those partners join us in allowing us to scale it.
No, I appreciate those insights, and I'm definitely, as I get to know you and the organization more, I'm certainly going to be myself drawn back to UnTours Foundation as sort of I would say a gold standard to hold other organizations to, like to reference back. So given that, you do hold that position in the industry, give us some practical advice to close out here for travelers and for people who are working in the industry. So specifically for travelers looking to make decisions to travel with companies that are more sustainable, what should they be looking for? I asked Shannon this, of course, as well, but I think it's so important to understand because there is this concept of greenwashing, and every company now has some sort of like sustainable part of their business. And some companies are doing it. I would say most companies are doing it for the right reasons. Some companies are doing it because they know they have to, because it's, as Eric Blatchford from one of the board members of Adventure Travel and Trade Association said to me on our Captains of Industry podcast. He was one of the first CEOs of Expedia. He's an industry icon, but he said, sustainability is table stakes now for companies in the adventure travel space. If they're not prioritizing sustainability, customers aren't going to choose them. So if that's the case, then companies are now competing over what they're doing, right? And there's an element of just trying to make sure that it looks good and sounds good. So tell us, what are the signals you look for in a company, and what should our travelers pay attention to know that they're choosing the right organization to travel with?
I'll say this is really hard to do as a traveler, even as a business, like searching for suppliers. The other travel companies that we want to work with, or we want to hire to handle a certain portion of our trips that we sell. It's hard to do because you don't know the actual inner workings. When you look at a website, you don't actually know what's going on. So I would say, practical advice: no company is perfect. So you're not going to get the perfect company, but there are some that are trying harder than others, and that are built, like their business model itself is more sustainable than others. Um, and a few ways to see that, or to have a better window into that. The first one, we go back to the very beginning of our conversation, is around certifications. There are some certifications that are real, and the B Corp certification is one that is applies to all industries, not just to tourism, which I think makes it more powerful. But it's really challenging to become a B Corp. If you are a certified B Corp, you are real. You're not perfect, but you are truly on the journey towards sustainability and have made good progress in that journey. Sustainability universal, the more broad terms of sustainability, inclusive of that is of course environmental. So I say look for certifications, and look specifically for the B Corp certification. That is not a greenwashing certification. You don't become a certified B Corp because you write a check or because you sign a few things. It has to be real. So that would be probably my biggest recommendation, is to look for that. And otherwise, I would say is seek out just the smaller, locally owned places. It's hard to gauge the sustainability of those compared to the bigger ones, but at least when you're traveling, you know where the money's staying. You know where the money, like the profits, are going. So I think that's an important piece of any travel experience, is to seek out the local ownership, acknowledging that sometimes that's impossible, or sometimes it's doesn't quite fit. But if and when able, it it allows for an assurance that those dollars are staying local.
And Jonathan, what advice would you give for industry leaders that are looking to make their businesses more environmentally and socially sustainable, especially in the next 3 to 5 years? What would be some of your advice to them?
So, really good question. Also acknowledging it's not easy, but I would say, similar to the consumers, look for verified sources, look for certifications, look for B Corp certification when you're seeking out your partners or your suppliers. That means something. It's real. I would say, don't be afraid for the larger companies that are working with, again, like an operator that's hiring in local companies to do portions of the trips they're selling. Find the appropriate balance between risk and social reward of working with locally born and bred companies. Sometimes it's easier to work with a larger company that's more sophisticated, that knows how to speak the insurance speak and has these kind of things, and it is easier at scale, but it limits the potential positive impact. So I would say be willing to take a bit of risk, and be a little more creative with that. And one thing that I think is super important, I say to companies all the time, and business leaders: you can't manage what you don't measure. So you really need to know what your negative and positive impacts are. And so a lot of companies have, a sustainability director or VP, or someone who's really taking that deep dive, but a lot don't as well. And I think that's a miss. If you don't know where you stand, then you can't fix it, or you can't work to offset it in other ways. And one important tool for that, I sound like a B Corp advocate right now. I guess that's because I am, to a certain extent. No, they're not paying me to be so. But the assessment process to become a B Corp, it's in the midst of a change right now. So I don't know. I'm not fully aware of the new assessment and how it's working. But I'll speak to the old assessment. Is a really powerful management tool, because it asks you many questions about all aspects of your business and how it can be good or bad for environment, for employees, for local communities, for local government, for all the different aspects. And it's just like a really intensive internal look on where you're good and where you're not. And for me, a really valuable tool. So I think going through the process of assessing yourself and knowing where you stand is an essential step along the way towards becoming, a net positive for the world. So those are a few practical pieces of advice. The last one I'll say is there's going to be some negative externalities of the work that you're doing. You're going to want to try to offset that in some ways. There are some amazing initiatives that can help you offset that. I happen to help lead one of those. And so if anyone is interested in supporting small businesses to help them become better and seeing that as a tool for your larger business to counteract some of the negative realities of what it takes to run your business, we'd love to talk and be a part of that solution for you. But it's not just us. There are others out there who can be those solutions. And as an industry, we just need to be willing to engage in those conversations, take the risk, be willing to sacrifice to a certain extent so that we are truly achieving that net positive that we all claim to want and we all should want.
It's really interesting to get your perspective on these. I know people listening to this will likely reach out to you, and as they should. I know you'll have to manage your inbox, your LinkedIn messages, but nevertheless, there's so much you have to offer the industry. I know that's why you guys offer consulting services as well to work with other organizations. But it's the more I speak to you, the more intrigued I am about UnTours, the foundation, your role in the industry. And so I'm delighted that you are available to join us for the sustainability series. I'm thrilled that we had the chance to reconnect today, especially given that we got a chance to meet in person. I know we're recording remotely today, but I certainly look forward to seeing you at many industry events next year and continuing our collaborations. But yeah, for me and the Travel Trends team, I just want to say thank you for being a part of it. And obviously, thanks, Shannon, for tapping me on the shoulder and saying, you should bring Jonathan back. She was absolutely right. And wishing you and the organization every success in 2026 and beyond. So thank you again, Jonathan. Finish off by letting us know how people can reach out to you, learn more about UnTours, and partner with you guys.
Sure. Well, again, it was a true pleasure and honor to be on here and to allow us to share a bit of our story. Allow me to share a bit of our story. So I'm very thankful for that. How to get a hold of me? Find me on LinkedIn. Search my name, Jonathan Coleman, UnTours. You'll probably find me. Email, I'm happy to receive emails. I may not respond within 24 hours, depending on what else is going on, but I will respond eventually. So people can email me at jonathan.coleman@untours.com. So I'm there. You can please take a look at the website of the foundation, untoursfoundation.org, or the travel company, untours.com, just for more information so you can understand what we're all about. But yeah, I'm happy to communicate with anyone, happy to share what I know. And, we have a narrow niche in this industry, which is about capital to small businesses. But I know the industry needs more, and our world needs our industry to do more. And so the last thing I'll say is this: tourism represents 10% of global GDP, 10% of global jobs, and almost 10% of global emissions. So where our industry goes, to a large extent, the world goes. We are a massive lever for good or ill in the world. And therefore, that comes with pressure and responsibility. And everyone within the industry needs to acknowledge that, accept that responsibility, and play their part. And so I'm happy to, outside of playing our part in my day-to-day work, I'm happy to help the industry as a whole move forward. And that the industry moves forward by individuals within the industry making decisions to move it forward. And so I would love to have conversations that help that happen. So please reach out.
Amazing. I know our listeners definitely will. So thank you again, Jonathan. And yes, I look forward to seeing you throughout the year. And please pass along my best regards to the rest of the team.
Thank you. Same to you and your team.
Thanks so much for joining us on this latest episode of Travel Trends, our part 2 of our sustainability series brought to us in partnership with our friends over at Intrepid. I certainly hope you enjoyed the conversation today with Jonathan Coleman, the co-CEO of the UnTours Foundation and the CEO of UnTours. Thanks again to Shannon Geehan, the Chief Sustainability Officer for the Travel Corporation, for recommending that Jonathan be a part of this series. I thought he was a perfect addition, and I'm really excited to bring you next week's conversation with Dr. Susan Etty, the Global Environmental Impact Manager over at Intrepid. That is also an incredible story, the journey they've been on and what they have planned in 2026 going into 2030. It's a really fascinating discussion, so make sure that you are subscribed on the streaming platform of your choice to be notified when new episodes go live. And then don't forget, we do post clips and highlights on all our social channels, so be sure to check those out on Instagram, YouTube, and LinkedIn. And then, of course, our monthly newsletter, which we sent out a happy holidays message to all of our team here in December, and the next one will be coming out in early January. Thanks again to all of our listeners for supporting the Travel Trends over the course of this year, all of our partners, all of our guests. It's been a huge honor to be able to bring all of these episodes together. And I know our team is ready for a brief break, but we are going to be back with a massive season 7 and the remainder of season 6, which is going to be our aviation series and a couple more captains of industry. So lots to look forward to in 2026, but I hope you enjoy the holidays, have a wonderful break, and we'll look forward to speaking to you all again in the new year.